The heavy scent of pine and impending snow hung over Oakhaven, Vermont. As the clock struck midnight on Christmas Eve, Arthur Vance sat in his dim kitchen, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock echoing the frantic beating of his heart. Across from him, Elena's voice had finally ceased, replaced by a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the winter air. The argument had been a long time coming, but the ending was something no one in this quiet town could have ever predicted. The shift in Arthur was instantaneous and terrifying, a sudden break in the mental dam he had built over years of a crumbling marriage. One moment Elena was shouting about his failures, her face twisted in a mask of contempt, and the next she was motionless on the cold linoleum floor. He didn't feel regret, only a cold, clinical need to preserve the life he had left. He knew she would take everything from him, the house, his dignity, and their 2 daughters sleeping upstairs. To ensure his future, Arthur committed the unthinkable in the pale glow of the Christmas tree lights. He walked to the wooden block on the counter and retrieved the longest blade he owned, its steel shimmering with a deadly promise. Returning to the floor, he worked with the grim efficiency of a man possessed, silencing the threat forever. The festive decorations around the room seemed to mock the scene, their bright colors clashing with the darkness now spreading across the kitchen tiles. While the rest of the town celebrated, Arthur retreated to the backyard shed, hauling a heavy gym bag through the fresh powder. He moved like a ghost, his breath hitching in the sub-zero temperatures. Inside the cramped wooden structure, he stashed the remains, hoping the bitter Vermont frost would act as a natural tomb to mask the evidence. He looked up at the bedroom windows, where his girls were dreaming of Santa, unaware that their father had just become a monster. As Arthur scrubbed the floors, a different kind of darkness was brewing downtown. A group of thrill-seeking drifters, known to the locals as the Mistletoe Shadows, were gathering in a derelict motel room. Jocks, the group's volatile leader, was counting their last few dollars with a scowl that promised violence. Beside him sat Skylar, a girl whose youthful appearance hid a soul far more depraved than any of the men in the room. They were hungry, broke, and looking for easy prey. Skylar had a plan that would turn their desperate Christmas into a legendary haul. She knew of a wealthy executive named Julian, who lived on the outskirts of Oakhaven, a man with a secret penchant for dangerous company. She suggested they lure him into a trap with the promise of a holiday party he would never forget. Jocks grinned, seeing the opportunity to not only solve their financial woes, but to indulge in the chaotic impulses that had been simmering within the gang. The gang descended upon Julian's estate under the cover of a rising blizzard. They didn't just want his money. They wanted to savor the power they held over a man who thought he was untouchable. After forcing their way inside, they bound him with festive lights, a sick joke that Skylar had insisted upon. As they tortured him for his safe codes, the carols playing on the radio were drowned out by his pleas. Once they had the cash, Jack showed no mercy, ending the man's life. With Julian's blood on their hands and his luxury SUV in their possession, the Shadows didn't flee the city. Instead, the adrenaline of the kill fueled a sudden, senseless craving for more. They drove through the snowy streets of Oakhaven like predators, looking for the next spark of movement. Near a flickering street lamp, they spotted a lone woman walking home from a late shift. Without a word or a plan, Jax leaned out the window and fired, taking a life for a designer jacket. The horror didn't stop there, as the gang's internal tensions began to boil over. Skylar noticed a car following them through the winding back roads. It was Richard, a boy she had discarded months ago who was now trying to win her back. He had no idea he was tailing a group of executioners. Skylar lured him closer with a beckoning hand. Then, as he pulled alongside them, she ended his hope with a single shot. The car veered into a snowbank, its headlights dimming in the storm. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon on Christmas morning, Oakhaven was a city of hidden corpses. Arthur Vance was driving his daughters to their grandmother's house, pretending everything was normal while his hands shook on the steering wheel. Meanwhile, the Mistletoe Shadows were scouting their next target, a small 24-hour convenience store on the edge of town. The peace of the holiday had been shattered, replaced by a web of violence that was only beginning. Arthur Vance arrived at his parents' house, his face a mask of artificial holiday cheer as he dropped off his daughters. He told them Elena was feeling unwell and would join them later, a lie that felt like ash in his mouth. The girls ran inside, excited for their gifts, while Arthur stood by the car, watching the snow fall on his trembling hands. He knew the clock was ticking, and the cold silence of his own home was waiting for his return to finish the cleanup. Meanwhile, the Mistletoe Shadows pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town, their eyes landing on a woman inflating her tires. Skylar whispered for Jocks to finish her voice devoid of any human emotion. But for the first time, Jocks hesitated, caught by a sudden, inexplicable flash of doubt as the woman looked up and saw the barrels of their guns. She didn't scream. She simply ran into the woods, disappearing into the white void. Enraged by the missed opportunity, the gang abandoned the stolen SUV and hijacked a black sedan they found idling nearby. They drove deeper into the rural village of Oakhaven, where the houses grew sparse and the forest grew dense. Little did they know their path was about to cross with two locals, Marcus and Sarah, who had ventured out for a late afternoon walk to clear their heads after a heavy Christmas meal, carrying only a camera and a bright LED light. Marcus and Sarah followed a narrow gravel track that led toward the dark heart of the woods. The trees stood like ancient, silent sentinels, their branches heavy with ice. As they rounded a bend, Marcus's flashlight caught the glint of metal. A car was parked haphazardly in a spot where vehicles were strictly forbidden. It was the black sedan the Shadows had just taken, its windows already beginning to frost over in the plummeting temperature. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She pointed the light toward a strange, gnarled tree to distract herself, while Marcus adjusted his camera settings. Suddenly, Sarah gripped his arm, her voice a terrified whisper. In the middle of the path behind them, just outside the reach of the LED beam, stood a man. He didn't move or speak. He simply watched them with a predatory stillness that suggested he had been following them for miles. The man was Jocks, separated from his group and testing the waters. Marcus, trying to remain calm, called out a greeting and offered the stranger some light, but the reply was a short, cold refusal. Sensing the mounting danger, the couple turned and walked quickly toward the next village, refusing to look back. They didn't see the rest of the Shadows emerging from the tree line, their faces hidden behind festive scarves, watching the couple escape into the light of the town. While the Shadows prowled the woods, Arthur Vance returned to his empty kitchen. The reality of his actions began to warp his mind, the silence of the house becoming a deafening roar. He stared at the refrigerator, half expecting to see movement, his thoughts spiraling toward self-destruction. He briefly considered ending it all right there, but a knock at the door shattered his trance. It was the local police, conducting a routine check after a neighbor reported a disturbance. Arthur didn't answer the door. He retreated to the shadows of the hallway, watching the officers through the window as they circled the perimeter of his property. They moved closer and closer to the shed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. One officer paused, sniffing the air as he detected a faint metallic scent that didn't belong in the crisp winter night. Arthur gripped his kitchen knife, realizing that his sanctuary was about to be breached. Miles away, another tragedy was unfolding on the icy highway leading out of Oakhaven. A young father driving a pickup truck lost control in the catastrophic winds that whipped across the southern belt of the county. His trailer jackknifed, rolling the vehicle into a snowy ditch. A passerby, a former medic, rushed to help, only to find a scene of absolute carnage. The driver had been partially decapitated by the shifting weight of the truck, a grim reminder of how quickly life ends. The medic stood in the snow, looking at the severed head of a man who just moments ago had a family waiting for him. He felt a profound sense of helplessness as he called the authorities, unaware that the police were already overwhelmed by the horrors occurring back in town. As he drove away in silence, he wept for his own son, realizing that the darkness in Oakhaven was spreading like an infection, claiming the innocent and the guilty alike on this cursed night. Arthur Vance watched from the darkness of his hallway as the police officers moved toward his backyard shed. The smell of decay was faint, but unmistakable to those trained to find it. Using heavy tools, the officers forced their way inside, where they discovered the gem bag containing Elena's remains. Arthur didn't wait for them to return to the house. He slipped out through a side window, disappearing into the snow-covered trees. He was now a hunted man in a town already drowning in blood. While the police were occupied at the Vance property, the Mistletoe Shadows arrived at a small, isolated house on the outskirts of Oakhaven. This was the home of Arthur's aunt, where several family members had gathered for a quiet holiday. Among them was a young boy who had recently immigrated to the area with his parents. They were enjoying hot cocoa and popcorn, completely unaware that a group of thrill killers was currently testing the locks on their front door. The boy's father, a man of quiet strength, was the first to notice the movement outside. He saw Jax approaching the porch with a stolen hunting rifle, his eyes wide with a manic intensity. Without a moment's hesitation, the father ushered his family upstairs, locking them in a bedroom and bracing the door with a heavy dresser. He grabbed a simple kitchen blade and headed back down to the foyer, prepared to defend his family against the encroaching madness. Jax kicked open the front door, the wood splintering under his boot. He stepped into the main room, the rifle held loosely in his hands, sensing an easy victory. But the father was waiting in the corner, hidden by the shadows of the Christmas tree. As Jax passed, the father lunged forward, striking him over the head with a heavy object. The blow didn't knock Jax out, but it caused him to drop the rifle, sending it sliding across the polished floor. What followed was a brutal, raw fistfight in the middle of the festive decorations. The two men grappled on the ground, knocking over chairs and shattering ornaments. Upstairs, the boy listened to the terrifying commotion, frozen in shock at the sound of his father fighting for their lives. He had always seen his father as a gentle man, but in those moments, he realized the terrifying depths of bravery his father possessed when faced with certain death. The father managed to gain the upper hand, delivering a series of powerful blows that left Jax dazed and bloodied. Outside, the rest of the Mistletoe Shadows heard the struggle and prepared to storm the house, but the sound of distant sirens caused them to hesitate. The police, alerted by a neighbor's call, were finally closing in. Skylar hissed a command, and the gang retreated back into the woods, leaving their leader to face the consequences of his violent spree. When the officers arrived, they found Jax pinned to the floor by the father's weight. But as the police began a sweep of the backyard, they discovered an even more disturbing detail. Hiding in the shadows near the back porch was Jax's older accomplice, a man with a long history of aggravated assaults. He had been waiting with a knife, hoping the family would flee out the back door and straight into his arms. The father's decision to stay inside had saved them all. The older man was taken into custody alongside Jax, but the sense of relief in Oakhaven was short-lived. The news of Julian's murder and the highway decapitation began to spread, turning the town into a place of paranoia and fear. Families locked their doors and stayed close to their phones, wondering who would be the next victim of the darkness that had descended upon their village. The festive lights now seemed to illuminate a landscape of absolute horror. Arthur Vance, meanwhile, was wandering through the same woods where the shadows had hidden. His mind was a fractured mess of guilt and survival instincts. He found himself near a small village with only a few houses, close to the highway. He watched from the tree line as a couple, Marcus and Sarah, returned home, looking shaken. He saw them talking to the police on their porch, realizing that the net was tightening around everyone who had stepped into the dark that night. As the clock ticked toward the end of Christmas Day, the body count in Oakhaven continued to rise. The police had captured the leaders of the Mistletoe Shadows, but the trauma they left behind would haunt the survivors for years. For Arthur Vance, there was no escape. He stood in the frozen forest, looking back at the town that was now synonymous with a massacre, knowing that justice was coming, whether from the law or from his own shattered conscience. While police combed the woods, a different drama was unfolding on the other side of Oakhaven. A young woman named Claire and her husband were visiting Claire's mother, Evelyn, for the holidays. Evelyn had recently started dating a man named Simon, whom everyone considered extremely strange. He was quiet, often closed his eyes, and behaved inappropriately, such as slowly eating chocolate with a distant look, which caused genuine disgust and inexplicable anxiety in those around him. One day, Claire and her husband were left alone in the house with Simon while Evelyn was at work. Simon spent several hours in his mother's bedroom behind closed doors. Occasional rustling sounds could be heard from the room, but most of the time it was deathly silent, as if he were simply lying motionless, waiting for something. This passive aggression and Simon's strange presence weighed heavily on the young couple, turning their cozy family home into a place where every corner felt hostile. On Christmas Eve, Evelyn decided to break up with Simon, a decision Claire received with relief mingled with dread. She feared Simon wouldn't leave quietly, but would commit a bloody massacre of everyone in the house. On Christmas morning, just before dawn, Claire and her husband hurried to her father's, hoping to avoid a difficult conversation and the potential outbreak of violence that seemed to hang in the chilly air of the town. However, due to heavy snowfall, they were stranded at their father's house and were only able to return to Evelyn's house the following day. Claire had a nagging feeling about Simon. The holiday weekend, with its fresh snow and chaos, seemed like the perfect backdrop for a murder. As they pulled up to the house, they saw their mother's car, but Evelyn never locked the doors, which on this frantic Christmas seemed like a fatal mistake. Walking inside, Claire screamed in horror. A thick red liquid was slowly oozing from the water dispenser on the refrigerator door. It had already filled the tray and formed a huge puddle on the floor, like fresh blood. An eerie silence reigned in the house, and Claire was sure she would find her mother's head in the freezer. Her heart pounded as her husband, his hands shaking, reached for the refrigerator handle, expecting the worst. To their immense relief, all that was inside was a bag of frozen cherries. Someone had deliberately placed them so they would melt and drip into the ice tray, creating the illusion of a bloodbath. Evelyn emerged from the shower unharmed, but the most terrifying thing was that she had never bought those cherries. It was Simon's final gift, a sinister psychological ploy designed to demonstrate how easily he could turn their lives into a nightmare. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance, completely disoriented, wandered the snow-covered streets of Oakhaven. He saw the flashing lights of police cars outside Evelyn and Simon's house in the distance, realizing the entire town had become a war zone. His own crime now seemed like just one piece in the vast jigsaw puzzle of violence that had engulfed Oakhaven over the holidays. He felt himself being watched not only by people, but by the darkness itself gathering in the woods. The Mistletoe Shadows, leaderless after Jacques' capture, split up. Skylar, the most cold-blooded of them, decided to eliminate any members who might crack under interrogation. She lured two of her comrades, Wendy and Marvin, to the city dump under the guise of a holiday party. There, in the cold moonlight, she ordered the remaining guys to deal with them, turning the dump into yet another Christmas graveyard. Killing for money gave way to killing for the thrill and silence. Oakhaven became a labyrinth, where an ambush or a cooling body could lurk around every corner. Skylar relished the chaos they wreaked, feeling like the mistress of this ghost town. She knew the police were on Arthur Vance's trail and planned to use him as a distraction to finally disappear in the approaching snowstorm. Arthur, exhausted and cold, stumbled upon an old barn in the woods, unaware that this was where Jax's father had once hid, awaiting his victims. He huddled in a corner, clutching the very knife he had used to kill Elena. In the stillness of the night, he heard the crunch of snow outside. It wasn't the police or a gang. It was retribution, the kind that always finds those who betray the spirit of celebration and humanity on the brightest night of the year. Arthur Vance was sitting in an abandoned barn when the door slowly creaked open and a gust of icy wind. Instead of the police, Skylar appeared on the threshold, clutching the very pistol with which she had killed Richard and Sarah. She was looking for a new refuge and hadn't expected to encounter another monster here. The two criminals froze, staring at each other in the dim moonlight, realizing their paths had crossed at this point not by chance, but as the logical conclusion of their shared madness. Skylar didn't hesitate. She saw Arthur as nothing more than a witness she didn't need. She raised her weapon, but at that moment the sound of a police megaphone pierced the silence of the forest. The officers following Arthur's bloody trail surrounded the structure. Both were trapped, the maddened father who had destroyed his family, and the cold-blooded killer who had turned Christmas into a bloody game. The entire world shrank to this tiny space, smelling of old wood and gunpowder. While police tightened their grip on the forest, detectives interrogated Jacques at Oakhaven Town Hall. He cracked under the weight of the evidence and confessed to every detail of their 2-week raid, including the torture of Julian and the random shootings in the streets. His words painted a picture of the absolute moral depravity of a group that had begun with robbery for profit and ended with murder for the thrill of it. The town shook with each new revelation. That same night, Arthur Vance made his final decision. Unwilling to face justice or his daughters, he lunged at the police, clutching a knife, forcing them to open fire. Skylar, revealing her true nature, attempted to use the chaos to escape, but was captured at the edge of the woods. Thus ended the active phase of the massacre, leaving behind only mountains of records and the shattered lives of those who survived that catastrophic night. For Claire and her mother, Evelyn, the horror of Christmas left its mark. Although Simon vanished, leaving behind only a sinister, bloody cherry in the refrigerator, his presence lingered in the house for months. Evelyn finally realized how close she had let a man capable of such sophisticated psychological abuse get to her family. The holiday, which was supposed to bring them together, became a permanent reminder of the fragility of security. The immigrant father who protected his family that night became a symbol of hope for Oakhaven. His courage and quick reflexes averted another tragedy when he confronted an armed Jax and his accomplice. He showed that even in moments of the darkest chaos, one person can stand against evil. However, even he could no longer look at the Christmas lights without shuddering, recalling the sounds of fighting in his festive living room. A former medic who witnessed a horrific highway accident never forgot the face of the dead driver in the snow. This incident became the final straw for many residents who decided to leave Oakhaven forever. Suicide rates in the region, already alarming due to the constant winds, skyrocketed. People said the wind in Oakhaven now whispered the names of those who didn't live to see the morning of December 26th. A few months after the tragedy, Arthur Vance died in a prison hospital from wounds sustained during his arrest. He took with him the final answers to questions about what had driven him to overstep the mark that Christmas night. His daughters were left in the care of their grandmother, trying to build a new life on the ruins of the old. Vance's name became taboo in the city, synonymous with the betrayal of what was most sacred to a person his family. Skylar and the other members of the Mistletoe Shadows received life sentences without parole. Their trial became the most high-profile in state history, revealing the horrifying truth of how quickly social norms can crumble under the influence of alcohol, poverty, and impunity. The victims' families received justice, but it could not bring back the loved ones whose lives were cut short for a pair of sneakers or a cheap jacket. Today, Oakhaven seems like a quiet town, but the scars of that Christmas in 2025 are everywhere. Lifelike mannequins no longer appear in shop windows, and residents avoid staying outside after sunset. The story has become a legend, a warning that evil doesn't always come from without. Sometimes it's born within us or lurks next door, waiting for the brightest holiday to strike.